to pass it over to David Short from Challenger Motor Freight to anchor the three speakers today, and then there's some time for questions at the end as well. And David's going to speak about from the point of view of industry and the trends that they're seeing. So the practical view from on the ground, literally. David, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to just put my presentation up. So as Ken mentioned, yes, I work for Challenger Motor Freight. So my context here is, describing sort of my job and what I look at from the marketplace. But to give you guys a bit of perspective, Challenger is a full service transportation provider that has both asset capabilities and logistics capabilities. So we sell and move customers freight all across North America. So we do that through our logistics team, meaning we use technology to partner customers' shipments with carrier capacity. But we also have a large asset base where we move a lot of goods on our own trucks. So we have just over 1,000 trucks, 3,000 trailers. We do have significant warehouse space, but we use all modes to move product. Intermodal, we use some air and definitely ocean. I think just going through here, I really want to highlight some areas where I see things trending from an economic side. I am going to give you guys a bit of an insight into how we as a company price products. So to give you the sense of how we see goods flowing, what we see as some emerging technology, and some other key areas that are becoming hotter topics, transportation security, and then a big one is the driver shortage. So just as a bit more context, I am a lifelong Hamiltonian, so I grew up in the area, went to St. Mary's High School, moved away from a bit, came back, actually got my MBA at McMaster in the 90s, was in banking for a number of years, and then for the last 15 years have been in transportation. So I worked at Purelator Courier, working with Canada Post, worked for Brinks Security and Transportation, and for the last 5 years have been here at Challenger. So again, my context really is around coming up with transportation solutions and looking at how we need to service our customers. So again, this is from my perspective of, you're going to see a bit of insight as to how I look at our customers and price our solutions here. So a big one here is some of the economic factors influencing rates. So again, we are North American based here at Challenger. We do have offices in Long Beach, California, Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas. And a lot of our asset-based network is cross-border focused. So a lot of the economic factors that we look at are housing starts, just to give a sense as to, obviously, is the economy growing? Are people, again, spending? This goes into our notion of what verticals and industries are spending more. Obviously, construction is a big one for transportation. Obviously, consumer spending is a big one. You can see the trends and making sure the economy is strong with how much people are buying in terms of goods. And then another big one is obviously unemployment. And pre-COVID, things were ticking all across the board. Unemployment was at historically low levels. Obviously, that's changed more recently, but it is a big factor in terms of what sets transportation rates. There is one more actually big factor, and that's inventory levels, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but did want to highlight what we're seeing in the last couple of months, capacity trends. So we take this from an industry source, it's DAT. They basically aggregate hundreds of billions of dollars worth of freight spending and look at, this is all US dollar based, what they deem as capacity indicators based on how many loads, meaning shipments, are posted on their load boards and how many trucks are also posted on the load boards. So what they do is they match people offering shipments to people offering capacity. And you can see back in 2018, there was a massive spike when capacity was very tight, which drives up rates. Last year, the freight market was I would say under conditions where there was a lot of extra capacity, and we had just come out of that capacity loosening in early March, when then COVID hit, and it's the gold line there in the upper left chart, where it's now actually surpassing the last couple of months. The demand is far surpassing where it's been in the last, I'd say, year and a half. You can see how the rates, these are rates per line haul mile. So the bottom charts really talk about average rates per mile. And you can see how the rates, again, are affected by the capacity. Obviously, supply and demand, as that shifts, rates come down. But obviously, as that tightens, rates are expected to go up in the near term. Back to inventory levels. So this is inventory to sales ratio. Again, that's the big trigger for what drives the capacity. Actually, looking a little bit at some of David's charts, if you see how, back in the early 90s, I worked for a just-in-time procurement department, and obviously with interest rates very high, you don't want to keep a lot of inventory on hand. And you can see as interest rates have stayed very low since 2008, that big blip in sort of the middle of the chart there, the inventory levels have creeped up a little bit. Again, the carrying costs, because interest rates are so low, not as big of an issue. And you can see where, and you might not see it very well, in the last month, obviously during COVID, that number has obviously hit a record level. So inventory levels, and obviously this is a ratio to sales, obviously not a lot of sales happening, but are at a level that we haven't seen in a really long time. So this, to us, indicates that there's obviously a lot of pent-up demand, and probably explains a little bit of the short-term capacity tightening. But again, when you look at inventory levels and the whole move away from just-in-time, it really, a lot of it depends on low interest rate environments and obviously availability of rail and warehouse space. Other big factors that when we look at when we price customers is the geography, obviously how close customers, in terms of where trucks go. Again, trucks cross the border, they got to come back. We try to obviously match up as close as possible to utilize our equipment most effectively. You can see where in Canada, there's a lot of natural head haul, back haul lanes. So a big back haul lane in Canada is Vancouver or BC back to Ontario. It's basically a 2-to-1 ratio. So for what goes out to Vancouver, only half of that is the demand that would come back, obviously putting a lot of pressure on rates. And in my opinion, it's a lot of what probably has driven a lot more air, because air is very similar. There's a lot of air capacity that historically has been there coming back from the West Coast to the East Coast, and that's been filled up by a lot of e-commerce that lands on the West Coast. So if you look at it where a lot of e-commerce gets sourced into Canada, a lot of it is coming in from the West Coast, which is probably adding to, in David's chart, some of what is being used more in terms of air. Again, other factor is just what other options are available. And obviously access to warehousing space or distribution centers. As people are, more onshoring, nearshoring, bring manufacturing and distribution back to North America, we're seeing that average length of haul for trucking is starting to decrease. So where it used to be that sweet spot of 500 miles, it's definitely shrinking as more distribution is set up to be closer to the end consumers. And why 400 to 500 miles is kind of a key number. It's the key number because that's what you could typically get out of a truck in terms of utilization in a day, which is obviously key to making sure you get paid fairly for what you do. And then obviously another one is just access to labor. Emerging technologies, e-commerce, obviously as customers want to stay connected to their customers. We see a lot of customers moving their models more to an e-commerce model. Big data, obviously as people look to capture trends and making sure they remain competitive. People are trying to target where home delivery services make more sense than traditional shipping in terms of longer length of haul. Obviously, the the rise of artificial intelligence, helping people make decisions. We are starting to use it for our network optimization. And then a big one here is omni-channel solutions, where we don't necessarily see customers wanting just data from us. We see them wanting data from everyone they deal with. So we're participating in a lot of technology where it goes beyond what we have, and it's basically, for example, a ubiquitous tracking solution that sits on top of what we do and aggregates information so the customer gets everything they need from everyone they're working with. Just a couple more slides here. Again, transportation security, obviously a big concern. And this is sort of the traditional security you think of as cargo theft. The interesting note here is there's a rise in fictitious pickups, which basically someone showing up at an area and pretending they're there for the pickup, when obviously they need to be vetted to make sure they're authorized to carry what they're supposed to carry. But if you look at, again, what's more targeted, it's food and beverage products. And obviously in Canada, a bigger concern is with the rise of cannabis products. They are very theft prone, and obviously need to make sure more is being done to transport products safely. But what's more and more coming into focus is the security around truck electronics. So as more and more goes on the truck in terms of technology, there is a fear that there's a capability for, again, some malware that could be activated against a truck that could literally shut down a truck. Trucks are controlled by electronic logging devices to make sure trucks fall within the regulated hours of service. And if someone were to hack into a system, obviously that is a concern where if they wanted to steal a truck, they could literally drive beside it and shut it down. Other big trends, driver shortage. Again, for us, we look at both US and Canada, but the US truck driver shortage is around 60,000 truck drivers most recently, but that is expected to steadily worsen over the next 10 years. Not for any other reason than the ones listed here. Obviously, as the workforce gets older, it's not as appealing of a job. And the people who are traditionally in truck driving roles are slightly older than the average worker. Truck drivers have not done the industry has not done a great job of attracting women. Again, over the last 20 years, it hasn't really grown as much for attracting more women into that role. Obviously, it is a tough job from a lifestyle. I mean, hey, who wants to drive to Vancouver? What should we do when we get there? Let's just drive back. I mean, that's not a very appealing job to a lot of people. And obviously, when unemployment's low, there's more alternatives there. And then I'm going to just quickly highlight the regulation around ELDs, electronic logging devices. They actually aren't mandatory in Canada. They are mandatory in the US. And that is due to start in June of 2021, which will have an impact on capacity. I mean, Challenger has been ELD compliant for many years, but there are estimated that around 15% of Canadian companies are not regulated to the degree they need and are likely not fully compliant with the hours of service regulations. So again, all that will mean is they'll be able to drive less, and again, less capacity available for people to ship goods via truck. That's all I had.
Thanks, David. As you were going through, I was curious about one thing. You talked about I guess, visibility into supply chains, into I guess particularly I think you're talking about trucking. But seems as well there's a trade-off with confidentiality, and if you're looking at multimodal transactions, somebody wants to know kind of where something is on any particular given in any particular kind of point along the delivery cycle. I'm just wondering what Challenger might be doing, or if there's any groups working on kind of cybersecurity protocols and kind of data sharing amongst different carriers.
Yeah, and so we work with the University of Waterloo. Challenger's based in Kitchener, Cambridge area, so we work with the University of Waterloo, and we actually have given them our trucks to try to hack into our systems to let us know where we might be vulnerable. But obviously the data security around how tracking technology is managed is very controlled, and it's been something that's been around. I mean, when I was at Purelator, 15 years ago, it was something we dealt with on a frequent basis, where we had to make sure there's no possible way people can accidentally or unintentionally see where their goods are that they shouldn't see. So it is something that I'd say it's probably the #1 area for transportation is tracking visibility. And it's obviously something that's been controlled, but again, still vulnerable, absolutely. And we're working very hard to make sure we work with partners that have obviously high data integrity. And again, we do allow ourselves to be tested to make sure we're not doing anything we shouldn't be doing.
Great. I was going to ask it too. Maybe there's a couple of questions that have come in. One is it's about if there are any specific challenges about doing in business in Hamilton, Niagara that are top of mind, I guess, relative to other places around the GTHA and I guess, well, in your network.
Yeah, I mean, the only big one, and again, I think it came out in some of David's notes, when we balance what we need to charge people to move their goods, it is, that balance of the head haul and the back haul. And with a lot of demand in the area in terms of where product is going, being the GTA, like Milton is a huge area. A lot of product coming in via rail right into Milton, that hub where things get distributed out of there. And obviously with the amount of warehousing space and distribution centers, it's more economical, meaning we give lower pricing for people who are closer to where our trucks are coming from. We have to factor in empty miles when we have to go beyond. Although I do see with cross-border shipping, anyone who's closer to the border has a distinct advantage. And if you look at Hamilton, I mean, you're 460 miles from Chicago. Again, 500 miles is what a truck can likely do in a day. You're 470 miles from New York City, and more importantly, you're right across the border. So U.S. carriers coming over. I know Milton's not too far from Hamilton, but if you look at Hamilton, Niagara, I mean, ideally truckers will come over the border, drop their goods, and then they would prefer to pick up a U.S. load and move intra-U.S. because as a cross-border move, you can't do an intra state or intra-country once you've crossed the border. So you have to cross the border directly. So again, I see Hamilton, Niagara as an attractive spot for northbound consolidated shipments, coming across the border.